Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Martin and I were just discussing this topic and talking about how big an impact it can have and how easy it might seem, to implement, but maybe not so easy for some people. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to this. We are joined once again by Martine Barclay, who is a consultant psychotherapist and coach. And today, Martine is going to be discussing how autonomy fuels motivation and well-being, why feeling trusted and empowered at work plays such an important role in shaping workplace culture, performance, and I guess the overall feeling for individuals of having control over the work and feeling motivated, empowered as a result. With that, over to you, Martine. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Sally. And hello, everybody, and welcome to this topic. It was interesting because as my counseling, coaching, psychotherapy work evolves with clients, I don't necessarily think of them in the way that this presentation is put together. So it was a really nice way of kind of consolidating and crystallizing thinking around it as well. So I hope you enjoy it. There's opportunity for reflection and also questions at the end. So let's get started. So essentially, what we're going to cover is the science for empowered work, what undermines motivation, how you can build empowered teams, and then there's going to be an opportunity for you to reflect and figure out what one thing you can do as a result of the presentation today. So let's get to it. So let's think about this. I'll give you a minute or two to do it. But when have you felt most motivated? Was it when you were trusted? Was it when you had ownership? Was it when your judgment mattered? Or was it when you could work in a way that suited you? And then equally, the flip side of the coin is, when did you feel most depleted? I'll give you a minute to just think about that. And if you'd like to, I'm happy for you to put it in the chat. That'll be interesting to see what's there. And I know Sally can see the chat, so we can have a look at that as we go through. But these are really important things for you to reflect on, because if something is not quite right at work, I'd encourage you to ask yourself these 4 questions. Am I trusted? Do I have ownership? Can I make suggestions? And can I work the way that brings out the best in me? And often one of these things is not quite where you would like it to be, whether that's real or imagined. So there are very important questions when we think about empowerment and your meaning at work in terms of what you get from it. So there's a really big shift happening at work. The shift is that the workforce experience is changing. And what's happening is that at work, you have got a higher cognitive load than ever before. You are constantly interrupted by that thing called a mobile phone and email. You have increased surveillance and measurement, because everything gets measured because it's done through systems. There are faster decision cycles because all the information is available much quicker. Burnout and disengagement is very real. And there's also reduced psychological ownership potentially. And so that means that work has changed. And even if you've been in the workforce for 10 years, you've probably noticed quite a change, let alone if this is your first role and all of these expectations are put upon you. So these things are what you're experiencing, but your organization still needs you to be innovative, to hold accountability, to be adaptable, and to sustain your performance. So that's quite a lot to be able to manage. Not impossible, it's absolutely possible, but it's how you get through it that really matters, right? Because control has a way of creating compliance, and autonomy creates engagement. So hopefully as we go through the slides, you'll actually see how autonomy can open things up, and then control can shut them down pretty quickly. And as we go through the slides, it would be good for you to think about yourself, your role, and how it is for you at work. So what does an empowered workplace look like? It's when people in the organization can feel like they are experiencing choice. There's trust by their manager, their team leader, and the broader organization. There's ownership for what you're actually working on and delivering on. You can influence how that's done. And it's a meaningful contribution for yourself, and it's flexible in terms of how it's achieved. So those are really important hallmarks of it, because it's not meaning that you have a lack of accountability. It doesn't mean that you have to work alone, and it doesn't mean that you're working in the absence of structure. You absolutely are having structure. It is collaborative, and there is accountability. And so I like to think of it as autonomy is freedom within the clarity that you have around what you're expected to do or what you're expected to deliver on. Because autonomy drives human motivation. So if we look at the self-determination theory, we say that people thrive when 3 psychological needs are supported: autonomy, connection, and competence. And so I have agency to do my job the way I see fit. I belong to my organization and peers and the team that I'm a part of, and I feel capable doing the job that I'm doing. So nobody goes to work to do a bad job, and everybody's doing the best they can. And sometimes when they're not, one of these 3 things are often absent. Because when these 3 things are absent, motivation drops, there's an increase in stress, the creativity window narrows, and your emotional exhaustion rises. And the reason why these things happen is because if you don't have agency, you're often waiting for someone to tell you how to do something. If you don't feel like you belong, you're waiting to be told how to do it and what it means to belong and how to belong, which is sometimes out of preference in terms of how you normally behave. And you also want to feel capable in your job. But if you're always getting picked on for things that aren't quite right or need to be better all the time with this continuous improvement idea, you may lose your feeling of competence, even though you are competent. And so your stress increases, and when stress increases, our capacity for creativity narrows. So we don't like to be creative when we're stressed. And also our emotional exhaustion rises, because as we get older, we actually get our energy from our emotions, not from doing exercise. But when we're younger, so in our teens, early 20s, we would get a lot of energy from exercising, but actually now it's emotion. And that's why many who come to EAP are actually emotionally exhausted and they can't figure out why. So the neuroscience of autonomy, it's always good to go back to the brain because that's the powerhouse. And greater autonomy is associated with increased intrinsic motivation. So that means that you are internally motivated. You're not waiting to find out whether you're going to get a bonus to do that particular task, or whether that's going to increase your rating at the end of the year for the performance review. You're actually doing it because you believe it's the right thing to do, and it's intrinsic to you. Your problem-solving capacity increases. You have greater resilience, because you're taking more of a learning approach to what you're doing. And there's a reduced threat response. So your stress levels are lowered, and you have an increased dopamine and reward activation. So all the good things are happening for you, and it's an opening up and an expansive space to be in. But if you are in an environment where there is a lot of control, and in some environments, there has to be a lot of control, right? Because sometimes when there is not enough control, some very bad things can happen, like people can die or mistakes can happen that are irreversible, right? So it's about the level of control and how it's managed. So if there's a lot of control that isn't necessary, you will automatically become more vigilant, because that makes you successful in that environment. You will get tireder quicker and probably for longer. So fatigue will really set in. You'll feel cognitive overload. And often people tell me that cognitive overload is kind of like a blank space. They just don't know. Someone's told them something and they just don't know how to respond because they're not quite sure what they've said, or they're looking at a whole load of things and going, I don't know what to do with this. They don't know where to start often. And then emotional withdrawal, right? Because if you don't feel great about what you're doing and you're worried that you're going to make a mistake, then actually you're going to decrease your engagement, because that enables you then to not get told off, right? Or to get told that you're not actually doing what you should be doing. So there is a definite burnout connection. And in my experience, it happens when there is a lot of responsibility, but a lot of lowered control. So highly responsible for something, but has no control over how that gets delivered. Needing to be constantly responsive. There's limited time for recovery. And often I would see that recovery in two parts, right? It would be the physical recovery. So you might do some stretches or something if you're always sitting at a desk. But there's also the mental recovery and the mental respite that you need from the work that you're doing. And then the emotional disconnection from work. Work becomes this thing that you do, and no part of you kind of gets into being a part of it. And often people speak about it, about feeling quite flat, about worried they've got depression. But these are things that your body is choosing to do to make you safer in the environment you're in. And really, a sense of agency is the strongest protective factor against burnout. So if there's anybody here on the call today who feels like they're on the road to burnout, I'd encourage you to start thinking about those three things that you actually need around capability, autonomy, and the third one, which is connection. Do you feel connected at work? Because sometimes disconnection happens as a strategy for you, and then you automatically think that it's about you not being able to connect. So there's some nuances there. But this is the myth of tight control. Often people think that if they control things tightly, then they can absolutely get the performance and that they will be helping people do their job. The reality is that that's not true. It does the opposite. That's the paradox, right? Because when you have tight control, you often see that there's excessive approval levels. And so, it could be something as simple as expenses. How many people have to approve your expense claim? How many people have to be involved in you deciding whether you go on a plane to visit a client or do something important for work? So approvals, that's really a good sign. Constant monitoring. So maybe your manager is saying, have you got that done yet? Where are you up to? Can I have a look at what you're doing? And I know that the positive intention could be that you want to help them and support them to do something successful. But often the experience of the person they're trying to help is actually they're being micromanaged, and why bother trying to put ideas in when it's just going to get, changed. Over-prescribed process, and so that's also partly what I was describing. Lack of decision latitude and meeting overload. So those are all signs of tight control. And often these signs of tight control, you might, if you've been with your organization for a while, you might say, oh, we never used to be like that, but all of a sudden we are. And I reckon that a lot of organizations are moving back into a tight control environment because of budgets and finances and the cost of living. So that doesn't make it right. It just means that that's the context you're in. And so how do we reduce control where we can and still manage our budgets? So empowered environments, they encourage initiative, ownership, adaptive thinking, and engagement. Because actually you get a lot more out of your employees if you are providing an empowering environment. And often the empowering environments are where we get some creativity and innovation, which organizations are really looking for. So here's some signs about where autonomy is missing. And I encourage you to have a think about this as a leader, but also as a team member. So teams might experience learned helplessness, so they don't even bother to think about what's going on and how they could come up with a solution, because actually they're going to be told to do it somehow differently, so there's no point. Dependency on leaders, so asking the leader for every step of the way what of the task, but then also asking the leader whether they're on the right path or what the next step should be. And often, if you're a leader, you'll be feeling pretty tired at the end of each day, because the decisions that you're making are not actually the decisions for which you're a leader for, but probably more in the weeds. Low initiative, decision fatigue, quiet disengagement. So you will have heard that phrase, quiet quitting. And then just tell me what to do. And so those are all signs that the team feels disempowered. And so as a leader, you'll experience reduced innovation in your team, reduced ideas when you're talking around the table as a team, an emotional flatness, which might feel really hard if you're running a meeting, increased turnover and burnout despite your wellbeing programs. So you might even have people that are taking extra sick days. You might have people who want to take some holiday because they're feeling a bit burnt out, they're feeling quite flat, and you're going, but hang on a minute, we've got all these wellbeing programs, what's going wrong? And it's not so much that they're not taking care of themselves, it's about how they're trying to operate in the environment that they've been given. So here's a reflection activity for you. In terms of your own environment, where do people in your workplace have genuine autonomy? Where are they over-controlled? What decisions could be done closer to the actual work? So, for example, what that means is that if we're working in an aged care home and we actually think it would be quicker to give dinner out in a particular way, how far away from that task does somebody need to make the decision that that's okay before it can be implemented? Yeah, so closer to the actual work. And then what might people do differently if the trust increased? You know, because like I said, nobody comes to work to do a bad job. And so if you trusted them to do a good job, what would they actually do? So I'll give you a minute there for you to have a think about that. And if you are a leader of some form, perhaps run through these questions twice. One for yourself as an employee of your organization, and the second time as a leader and what your team might be experiencing. Okay. So this is what teams actually need. They need flexibility, clarity, and trust. So that's why job descriptions are very important. There was a time when job descriptions were quite open, and maybe they still are, but there are elements of the job that require you to really spell out what's needed in terms of outcomes. So there's absolute clarity in terms of what each employee is doing in their job and what their outcomes are. Because with clarity comes clear outcomes, comes role understanding, and enables the person to prioritize. And so if you have got people saying to you as a leader, I've got all this on, what do you want me to focus on? That's a sign for you that either there's a workload problem or what they're doing, they're not clear on where the priority should be. And that might be a clarity challenge, a clarity opportunity for you as a leader. And so then trust, moving from controlling to coaching. Excuse me. And what that means is that if you're moving to more of a coaching model, you're actually providing questions, open-ended questions that helps the employee or the team member come to their own conclusion about what needs to happen next, right? They're not being told. And then flexibility, right, in terms of workflow, problem solving, and communication styles. So what is okay for the person to make decisions on and what's not, you know? So I am aware of an environment where people need to put in their diary what they're doing from 8:30 through to 4:30 every day. Even though there is a requirement that's completely unrelated to it as a KPI and an outcome, there is a need for people to know exactly what you're doing across that day. That's not empowering. And so it takes away some of that flexibility in terms of what you'd like to do, because if you did what you like to do, maybe people would be making a judgment about how you do things in your diary. Yeah, what's there? So flexibility, clarity, and trust are really important. And leaders have a very big role to play in terms of shaping the motivation. And so leaders who empower, ask more than tell. So that's more of that coaching approach. They are collaborative. They involve people in the decisions as much as they can, right? They reduce unnecessary friction. So if there are obstacles in the way that don't actually need to be there in terms of getting a job done, they are instrumental in many cases. A good leader is instrumental at moving it out the way or making the obstacle smaller so it's not so much of a block. Encouraging experimentation, so they're willing to take on some risk. They're also willing for people to learn. And that's really important compared to the punitive control approach. And then they support reflective thinking, which again is one of those coaching style things, and they trust capability. So, I often say to leaders who come to me through the EliteWell EAP, you hired this person, you knew what their skills were, and you backed them to be successful in the role. So how would it look if you trusted them to do the role? Yeah. And that's a really important question, because if you hire people with really good skills and you bring them in and you don't give them any autonomy, clarity, then you're actually you shouldn't have hired them. You should have hired someone different. So the question for you as a leader today is, how can I increase ownership without reducing support? Because empowerment doesn't mean less support. It just means support in a different way, right? Asking more questions, being more open, those kinds of things. And it's not what you think they need, it's what the employee or the team member thinks they need, right? So here are some practical strategies. So you reduce the unnecessary approvals where you can. You clarify the decision boundaries. So where can your team member make a decision and where can they not? And where do they have to defer to you as the team leader of the group? Introduce focus time. So stop being so much of an interruption. Increase participation in planning, because, in project management, planning is the largest time out of all of the elements of a project plan. Because if you plan well, then everything else will run quite nicely. If you're running a project and there are surprises everywhere, it's a sign you didn't plan so very well, or you didn't get the right people in the room. So you're going to encourage strength-based work. And if you don't know what your team member strengths are, make it an activity to find out. Shift from activity metrics to outcomes, and ask employees, what helps you to do your best work? Get to know them as people rather than as job roles and how they're going to contribute to what you need done. Because sustainable high performance requires empowerment. So if you consider yourself to be in a high performance culture, then empowering behaviors should also be there. And if they're not, this is an opportunity for change. Because sustainable performance requires psychological safety, which is about my manager has my back. Yeah. And I can say what I need to say to feel heard, whether that's to vent or to get a better solution. Sustainable performance requires recovery. So you can't go full tilt all of the time. It requires meaning. So you need to be attached for meaning to occur to your job and what you're actually doing. You need agency, so the belief that you can actually do it, and the cognitive space to do it. Because here's the thing, when we are stressed, our cognitive capacity shrinks and focuses on what really needs to be done, and there's no opportunity for creativity or problem solving. If we have creative space, it doesn't mean that we're not doing anything. It means that we're giving our brain time to let the cogs work and come up with different solutions that we otherwise might not have thought of, right? So high performance without autonomy will often lead to compliance fatigue, emotional exhaustion, and retention problems, because it just becomes too hard, right? Because people feel like they could be, you know, a different version of themselves, where a lot of people don't want to be. They want to be the full version of themselves and contribute fully. So empowered work helps people to think better, adapt faster, and sustain energy longer. And there's a lot of science to support that. So if you found that the pace of work has slowed down in your team, start thinking about empowerment and what you're doing to contribute to their own individual capacity to be empowered. So here is a personal action reflection. What would you do, or what can you do? What can you change? One thing that would increase autonomy, either for yourself and for others. I'm just wondering what that could be. So I've put down some ideas. You could maybe delegate differently, reduce the unnecessary checking, create more flexibility about how work is done, invite more input, and clarify outcomes instead of prescribing the process. Sorry, that's my typo. But those are some ideas, and you might find that as you've been listening to this presentation, you're actually going, oh, yeah, I could probably do that a little bit differently. And, you know, it's not if you have found lots of opportunities to provide empowerment, that doesn't mean that you're doing a bad job, right? It just means that you've got so busy that you've gone down to the path of least resistance, which is what you know, tried and tested. So it's an opportunity to flex back out again and provide that empowerment for your team. So I've talked a lot, but I want to leave you with this idea that people thrive when they feel trusted, capable, and able to influence their work. If they're not able to do those things, then it's not empowering, and you'll need to find ways that they can feel empowered. And I'd also like to let you know that empowered work, empowering people at work, it's not soft leadership. You know, it's not a softer way to lead. In fact, it's harder, but it's far more rewarding because you get more time back to yourself. And also, you probably get better ideas because everybody's got such different backgrounds and perspective. And so it's actually smarter and more sustainable leadership for you as a leader, as opposed to, you know, being quite directive and being quite controlling. So I hope that's given you some food for thought. I'm going to stop sharing so we can actually have some conversation if we need to and answer some questions.
Thanks, Martine. This really enabled me to reflect on my time as a leader, and it brought up all the things that I did wrong when I first became a leader, and not feeling confident in myself, and trying to, I guess, gain control by controlling what everybody else did. And,
That's it.
I think to be a leader who enables your team to have that autonomy, I think you need to do a lot of work on yourself and feeling comfortable in your role to be able to do that. There's so many different layers to it.
It's very layered, absolutely. And confidence, self-confidence is probably the bedrock of it for a leader.
Yeah. Someone said, thank you so much. I think this is such an important topic, and I will be sharing this with my leadership team. It's really important for people to feel valued in their role. And this is fundamentally the best way to prove we trust and value our team. I couldn't agree more.
Oh, isn't that wonderful feedback? And guess what? It's free. You
Yes.
don't have to pay for anything more.
Yeah. And, it also then frees you up as a leader or a manager to focus on, improving the business and what else can you do for your team.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Someone else said, thank you, Martine and Sally. A very nice reminder all round. Have a great day.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, lovely. I love it. Thank you so much. That was really great. I really enjoyed that.
You're welcome.
And if anybody watching or listening is either a leader or an employee or a business owner, and would like to provide this as a workshop or training for your team, please get in touch. And as always, if anybody feels like they need support, please reach out via the Leap Well Plus app or on our helpline on 1300 908 031. Thanks so much, Martine. We'll see you next time.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everybody. Have a nice day.
Yeah, bye.